The UN building buzzed like a living machine, bright, humming, and full of expectation. Heads of state, global celebrities, polished journalists. They all moved through the grand marble halls like pieces on a diplomatic chessboard. Laughter mingled with translation echoes. Security radios crackled. Cameras flashed non-stop. It was the opening day of the 2024 Global Peace Forum. Outside, armored vehicles lined the streets. Inside, tension tightened the air like a drum. And then he entered, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the man many called Africa's quiet storm. The young leader from Burkina Faso, whose speeches had set fire to hearts and rattled governments. He didn't need an entourage. No grand entrance. Just a tailored navy suit. A single golden pin of his nation on his chest. And eyes focused like steel. He walked calmly through the lobby, nodding politely to those who made eye contact, though very few did. Whispers followed in his wake. Then, without warning, a hand pressed hard against his chest. "Stop right there." I barked a tall security guard in a black suit. "You're not on the list." For a second, the entire lobby seemed to freeze. Captain Traoré blinked. "Excuse me, no access." The guard snapped. "Please step back." All around them. Movement stopped. A whoosh fell like a curtain. Delegates turned. Journalists lowered their mics. One nearby camera light clicked on, its red beam blinking. Was this a mistake, or something much more calculated? Traoré didn't protest. He didn't raise his voice or argue. He just stood still, calm, proud, but his eyes said everything. They held the sting of a man humiliated not for who he was, but for what he represented. In that moment, it wasn't just about credentials. It was about presence, about power, about being seen, and what no one could have predicted was who would step forward next. From the back of the crowd, a familiar voice broke the silence. Low, calm, commanding. It was Morgan Freeman. He walked forward with a quiet grace, his voice slicing through the tension. And what he was about to say would shake the world. Morgan Freeman stepped forward, his footsteps soft against the marble. But the moment thundered. He wasn't scheduled to speak. He wasn't supposed to be there, not now. But he saw what others refused to acknowledge. And he acted. The security guard's jaw tensed. "Sir." "Step back." Morgan didn't blink. He looked directly at him. "The man you're blocking," he said slowly, "is the only one in this building who's actually fighting for peace." The words hit like a thunderclap. The room froze. A second security guard touched his earpiece. Another whispered into a radio. Two more began inching closer. The tension was electric coiled and waiting to snap. Captain Traoré stood motionless, dignified, but in his silence was a storm. Behind him, cameras rolled. Journalists, sensing history, lifted their phones, pens forgotten in their hands. From the corner, a UN coordinator in a blue skirt suit sprinted over, heels clicking in panic. "Captain Traoré, I'm so sorry," she said breathlessly. "There's been a mix-up with your credentials." But the guard didn't move. He stayed planted, like he was guarding something far more than just a door. Morgan leaned slightly closer. "You know who I am," the guard hesitated. "Yes." "Sir." "Then you should know, I don't speak unless it matters." The crowd held its breath. I've played presidents, gods, and convicts, Morgan said, but never have I seen a man blocked from a peace summit. For bringing real truth. The words struck deep. Still. The guard didn't flinch. Rules are rules. Morgan smiled, not out of amusement, but something older, wiser. And humanity is humanity. A beat passed. And then, finally, the guard stepped aside. Captain Traoré walked forward. Slow, composed. But the damage was done. He had been stopped, humiliated, questioned while the world watched. And not one leader had come to his defense. Not until Morgan Freeman spoke. As Traoré passed through the doorway, his face showed no anger, but the weight he carried was now heavier. Because he wasn't just representing himself. He was carrying millions of unheard voices. In the background, cameras flashed again. But this time, they weren't just capturing a moment. They were capturing a reckoning. And it had only just begun. By the time Captain Traoré entered the main hall, the story had already gone viral. A 12-second video grainy. Unfiltered. Reel was exploding across the internet. Morgan Freeman defends African leader at UN. Security guard stops the wrong man. It spread like fire. People weren't just watching. They were reacting. In Dakar. In Nairobi. In the dusty neighborhoods of Ouagadougou, mothers wept. Young men watched in silence. Activists punched the air. Some out of pride. Others out of rage. But inside the hall, silence reigned. Traoré stepped in. Eyes forward. He walked past rows of polished shoes and tailored suits. No hand was extended. No nod of welcome. Not even a glance from the presidents he'd shaken hands with just months before. He sat near the back. Alone. Then, from across the aisle, a frail man gray-haired, gentle rose from his seat. He walked slowly, deliberately, and placed a firm hand on Traoré's shoulder. You did nothing wrong, son, he whispered. His accent was Caribbean. His eyes held fire. Traoré nodded quietly. Thank you. The speeches began. Buzzwords echoed through the chamber. Justice. Unity. Progress. But none of it felt real. Traoré listened. Not because he expected truth, but because he needed to understand the performance. His presence in the room was not a line item. It was a disruption. And somewhere in the crowd, Morgan Freeman watched. Silent. Still. But fully awake. He could feel it. The shift. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was a reckoning with the world's conscience. Backstage. Aides whispered. In glass rooms. Diplomats murmured in French. English. Arabic. Why was he stopped? Who gave the order? Was it an accident or a warning? Then, an aide rushed to Traoré's side. Captain, we've heard things. Some delegates didn't want you here. Traoré's eyes darkened. Why they fear your voice? My voice, he asked softly. I speak for people who have none. The aide nodded. Exactly. And that's what scares them. His fists clenched. But not in anger, in purpose. He thought of dry villages. Children with cracked feet walking miles for water. Mothers who prayed for peace. Soldiers who followed him, not for power, but for hope. He wasn't just in a hall. He was on a front line. And the battle wasn't behind him, it was right here. Right now, Captain Traoré sat in the back of the hall. but the weight of 1,000 stares pressed against his shoulders. He wasn't just alone, he was being erased in real time. No smiles. No acknowledgements. The leaders around him shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending not to see him. Delegates scrolled on their phones. Others stared straight ahead, as if the man who had just gone viral didn't exist. And yet, the cameras kept glancing his way, because silence can be deafening, and absence, when deliberate, can scream louder than words. Traoré adjusted his suite, kept his chin high. He had faced darker days. He had faced guns. What were cold stares and fake smiles compared to the weight of children dying from neglect? He looked up at the podium as a well-known European prime minister spoke of global harmony. Another leader called for respect among nations. But their words were hollow. Traoré knew it. So did Morgan Freeman, still watching from near the front. Arms folded. Face unreadable. Then, the moment came. Captain Ibrahim Traoré was called to speak. The hall fell still. He rose slowly. Not in anger. Not in grandeur. But with something far more dangerous: conviction. Every step he took toward that podium echoed like a challenge. Not to any one person, but to every system that had ever tried to silence a voice like his. He reached the microphone, paused, and spoke. Not in slogans, not in blame, but in stories. He told of a village without roads, where children walked hours for clean water, where farmers waited for rain like it was mercy, where young girls learned to read by candlelight and dream not of escape but of being heard. His voice cracked once, just once, and in that small, broken moment, the world heard something they hadn't felt all day: truth. No applause came at first, just stillness, uncomfortable, aching stillness. Then a single clap, then another. Not thunderous, but honest. Real. Captain Traoré bowed his head gently, then returned to his seat. Morgan Freeman's eyes didn't leave him. The hall may not have erupted, but something deeper had shifted. The silence had been broken, and truth had found a voice. The applause had barely settled when Morgan Freeman stood. Not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. Every camera in the hall snapped toward him. He walked slowly toward the podium. The soft hush of his footsteps louder than thunder in that room. Delegates shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward. Others looked away, already sensing this wasn't going to be comfortable. He adjusted the microphone gently. Sometimes, he began, the loudest voices are not the most honest. The room froze. Morgan's tone wasn't sharp. It was soft. Too soft. And that made it cut deeper. Sometimes, he continued, truth comes wrapped in silence, wrapped in dignity, wrapped in a story about walking for water, or teaching a child under candlelight, not in tweets, not in slogans. He glanced toward Captain Traoré, seated quietly near the back. This man, Morgan said, walks roads most of us will never see. He fights battles we don't want to admit still exist. And yet, here he is. Blocked. Dismissed. Ignored. He paused. The weight of that sentence hit like a stone. And the question isn't how that happened. It's why we let it. Phones were raised. Pens scratched furiously. But in the moment, it felt like no one breathed. Morgan leaned forward. Voice firmer now. What if? Just what if? The people we ignore are the ones we most need to hear. He turned, looking directly at the crowd. Hear me now, this man was stopped at the door. But truth walked in anyway. Silence. Then a breath. A murmur. A ripple. He took one final glance at Traoré. Let us listen. Truly listen. Not just today, but from now on. And with that, he stepped down. The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was holy. Somewhere in the corner, a young journalist wiped her eyes. A South American delegate lowered his head, ashamed. And on the live stream, thousands of comments poured in from across the globe. Finally, someone said it. Captain Traoré remained still. But something had shifted in his chest. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, the room had heard him. Not through a microphone, but through a man who used his voice to open a door that should never have been closed. The world didn't just listen. It erupted. Within hours, Morgan Freeman's speech and Captain Traoré's quiet testimony had flooded every screen, from glowing billboards in Times Square to cracked TVs in rural villages. People weren't just watching. They were waking up. Hashtags trended. News anchors paused mid-broadcast. Visibly moved, a famous footballer in Brazil posted the clip with one word: respect. In Burkina Faso, children huddled in classrooms, watching the replay with wide, glowing eyes. Mothers cried in silence. Old men nodded, hands folded over walking sticks. But behind the scenes, the walls of power were shifting. That evening, in a closed-door conference room several floors above the Grand Hall, a meeting was called. 10 men, 4 women, 1 agenda. They didn't replay the speech. They didn't mention Morgan Freeman by name. They just asked one question: how did we lose control of the narrative? Someone responded. We let him speak. Another said flatly, we underestimated him. The truth was more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Traoré hadn't come with anger or protest. He came with a mirror. And the world didn't like what it saw. But not everyone in that room wanted to suppress him. Across the table, a woman in a slate gray suit leaned forward. She was a senior UN official, known for discretion and quiet defiance. We can't bury this, she said. The people won't allow it. Later that night, long after the crowds dispersed, she knocked on Captain Traoré's hotel door. He opened it calmly, as if he'd been expecting her. I want to help, she said quietly, but you need to understand. Fighting the system from the inside, it's like digging through stone with your hands. He nodded, eyes steady. If we don't try, who will? She reached into her bag and handed him a thin folder. Inside emails, memos, directives, proof that certain delegates had lobbied to block his entrance that morning. They thought you'd walk away, she said. Traoré studied the papers, jaw tight. They were wrong. Together, they sat at a small table near the window. The lights of the city flickered beyond the glass. Their plan was simple. Not revenge, not scandal. Truth, told with facts, shared with dignity. And just like that, the quiet resistance began. Not in anger, but in clarity. Not with shouts, but with resolve. The morning after felt different. Something had shifted, not just in the building, but across the world. News outlets couldn't keep up. Headlines collided across continents. The man they tried to block. Truth in a navy suit. Morgan Freeman's stand sparks global reflection. Clips from the UN flooded social media. Not just Traoré's speech, Not just Freeman's words, but reaction videos, tears in Tokyo, silence in Cape Town, applause in Chicago. It wasn't just a political moment. It was a human one. In Burkina Faso, people gathered outside stores with old TVs in the windows. Some stood barefoot on hot pavement. Others sat on overturned buckets. Hands clasped. They didn't blink. They didn't move. Because for the first time, their pain had a platform. And their leader, a man born of dust and fire, was being heard. Meanwhile, inside the UN, something even stranger happened. Letters arrived. Hundreds, then thousands. Emails, voicemails, messages from school children, farmers, professors, strangers who didn't know where Burkina Faso was yesterday, but now saw it as a symbol. One message read, "He spoke for me, and I live oceans away." Traoré sat in a small office. They'd assigned him windowless. Quiet. His phone vibrated non-stop. But he didn't touch it. He was staring at a handwritten note from a girl in Haiti. It simply said, "You gave me courage to speak." That's when Morgan Freeman walked in. No camera. No fanfare. Just presence. He pulled up a chair. "They're listening," he said. Traoré didn't smile. "For now." Morgan nodded. "Then say more." While the doors open. Outside. Unstaff whispered in hallways. Delegates posed. Unsure how to proceed. The very room that once dismissed him now pulsed with quiet reckoning. That afternoon, Traoré was asked to return to the floor. A special session. Live broadcast. No interruptions. No confusion. He stood before a larger audience than before. Lights hotter. Pressure heavier. But his voice steady. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. He spoke of resilience, not just of his people, but of all people, dismissed and overlooked. He spoke of the power of being heard, and of the responsibility that came with listening. No finger-pointing. No shame games. Just truth. When he finished, the room sat frozen. And then, applause. Not polite. Not procedural. But deep. Human. And unstoppable. The applause didn't stop. It rose like a wave, slow at first. Then building. Not because it was expected, but because something inside the room had cracked open. For once, people weren't clapping for power. They were clapping for truth. Captain Traoré stepped back from the podium. His breathing was calm, but his hands trembled slightly. Not from nerves, from the weight of what had just happened. He returned to his seat. Not the back row this time. Someone had moved. Quietly. Without fanfare. And left a chair in the center. A silent gesture. A shift in the wind. From across the hall, Morgan Freeman gave a subtle nod. A soft smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not pride, but peace. Then, unexpectedly, Morgan stood again. He didn't walk to the front. He walked to Traoré. The cameras turned. The air shifted. In front of everyone, Morgan extended his hand and said, in a voice loud enough to reach the last row, "We've seen today what true leadership looks like." Gasps echoed through the room. Somewhere, a delegate dropped her pen. Others looked down, not out of shame, but reflection. Traoré Rosse. He shook Morgan's hand, not as a celebrity to a leader, but as equals in purpose. And that's when the moment transcended speeches and applause. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about presence, humanity. A man who walked alone now, walked with the world. Outside the UN building, crowds gathered, watching the live feed on giant screens. Mothers lifted their children to see. Teenagers cheered. Old veterans stood at attention. In Ouagadougou, church bells rang. In Rio, a mural of Traoré's face began to take shape. In Harlem, a spoken word poet changed her next show's theme, the man they tried to stop. Inside, the energy was no longer cold or controlled. It was alive. Some leaders leaned into their mics. Others stared off, quietly moved. Not every heart had changed, but many had cracked. And that was enough. As the session closed, the Secretary General approached the podium, his voice quieter than usual. "We came here to talk about peace," he said. "But perhaps we just saw it." And for once, no one disagreed. The hall stood not for protocol, but in respect. Captain Traoré had not just entered the building. He had entered history. That night, Captain Traoré stood alone at the window of his hotel suite. Below, the city lights sparkled like stars trapped in pavement. But his thoughts were elsewhere, on dirt roads, on dusty schoolyards, on the soft voices of children who had no microphone, no stage, no seat at any global table. His phone buzzed again. Another message. 1,000 more like it had come in just hours. One was from his mother. It simply read, "You made us proud. My son. The world sees you now, but we always did." He sat for a moment, breath heavy. Not tired, but changed. Morgan Freeman's words still echoed in his mind. "We've seen today what true leadership looks like." But Traoré didn't feel like a leader. He felt like a vessel carrying the weight of voices too often buried. Across the world, the ripple effect had already begun. In Senegal, a university launched a scholarship in his name. In Canada, a teacher rewrote her curriculum to include his speech. In France, schoolchildren debated the meaning of dignity because of him. Even in halls of power, conversations shifted. No one dared block his name anymore. No one could. But not everyone was applauding. Behind closed doors, meetings turned colder. Whispers returned. "He's gaining influence. He speaks too well. His story spreads too far." But it was too late. Traoré had become something no threat could erase, a symbol. Not just for Burkina Faso, not just for Africa, but for every quiet fighter who ever felt invisible in a room full of noise. One evening, weeks later, Morgan Freeman posted a photo. No caption, just an image. Traoré walking barefoot through a village, holding a little girl's hand. That photo alone broke the internet, because it reminded the world that the stage does not make the leader. The people do. Years from now, historians will mark the day a security guard raised his hand and said, "You're not on the list." But more importantly, they'll remember what happened next. They'll remember the silence, the voice, the applause that came, not from obligation, but from awakening. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't just attend a summit. He shifted the soul of it. And the world quietly changed. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is simply stand. When every system tells him to sit down, the final words of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's speech didn't just end a session. They ignited something. Not a roar, not a riot, but a quiet fire. It started in the chest of a South Asian delegate who wiped away a tear before clapping. Then, a West African ambassador who stood without being asked, then a Scandinavian minister who whispered to her aide. I've never felt that before. The applause didn't erupt. It rose. Slow, honest, relentless. It filled the grand hall, not just the air, but the people. Something had changed, not just in the audience, but in the rhythm of the room. Outside, crowds watched on giant screens. Mothers held children tight. Youth groups in Nairobi cheered. In New York, a boy pressed his hands to the glass of a storefront television, eyes wide with wonder. A girl in Syria wrote in her journal, I want to be heard like him. And inside, Morgan Freeman stepped forward one last time. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence said it all. But still, he looked at the crowd leaders, journalists, skeptics, and said clearly, we've witnessed today what true leadership means. It does not speak over others. It does not demand applause. It walks in with quiet strength and leaves behind a louder world. He looked at Traoré, not with admiration, but recognition, and Traoré nodded, because he knew this wasn't his victory. It belonged to the boy who walked 6 miles for water, to the woman who taught 3 generations under one broken roof, to the farmer who never stopped planting hope in barren soil. The story wasn't about him. It never was. It was about what happens when the world stops to truly listen. As the crowd filed out, no one spoke loudly. They didn't need to. The noise had already been replaced by something deeper understanding. That night, Traoré returned to his hotel. No celebration. No press conference. Just a chair. A quiet view of the city. And a heart full of his people. He didn't need headlines. The moment had already become a movement. And long after the lights dimmed at the UN, the world kept listening. Because sometimes, one man's silence is exactly what the world has been waiting to hear.